If you were following the news around Halloween 2016, then you heard about the clown sightings throughout the country. At first, people thought it was just one person playing a prank. Nobody really took it seriously. Then, it started happening again, and again, and in different areas. Sightings turned into creepy clowns jumping out of bushes and chasing kids around bus stops. Eventually, the police departments issued a statement that what was going on wasn't funny, and even Stephen King, who I think wrote the quintessential story about a killer clown, was quoted by the press as saying he found it frightening. I myself have never really been scared of clowns. I enjoyed the movie version of Stephen King's It, and movies like Killer Clowns from Outer Space are regular Halloween viewing for me. So, when I read these stories about creepy clowns being seen throughout the Carolinas, I took it as almost everyone else did. Just one big mass prank that people were overreacting to. In fact, I never really gave it any thought until I read a story about the same clown sightings happening in my hometown. Funny how that happens, isn't it? We don't really concern ourselves with anything until it gets too close to home. But even after reading the story about the Macon sightings, I didn't think much on it. Just copycat pranksters, I figured. Just people wanting a little thrill as the fall set in and as Halloween grew closer. What I would not give to return to that blissful ignorance. I had moved back to Macon a few months before it all happened. I lived in Atlanta for about a year, but that didn't work out. Classic story. College dropout moves to a big city to build a life for himself and then realizes that real life requires skills that college could never teach. So he moves back in with his parents. I insisted on paying my mum rent. We agreed on a minimal amount. I was able to pay it by working odd jobs like mowing lawns, fixing sinks, and babysitting. It wasn't until I actually started babysitting that I realized how weird the concept of a male babysitter is to some people. A female babysitter is apparently always pleasant, responsible, and nice, while all male babysitters are evil. My friends would always rib me. Why the hell would a guy babysit? They said. The truth is, I just love kids. Some people who know me say I'm just a big kid myself. I've always had a natural rapport with children. It was no different with Penelope. Her parents were highly esteemed members of Macon's upper pecking order. Yeah, they have one. And a lot of their time was dedicated to meetings, socials, events, etc. So I babysat for them practically every week. And I have to say, I really enjoyed it. I know the stereotype is that the child of the rich parents is spoiled and unpleasant. But Penelope was not that way at all. I mean, she had the typical childlike self-centeredness, but she was very sweet, a lot of fun, and I always looked forward to babysitting her. I called her Penny. What does this have to do with the clown sightings, you might ask? Well, Penny was into a lot of the typical little girl stuff. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, singing Disney songs, Barbie, all of that. But the thing she loved most was nature walks. There weren't a lot of forests and nature trails near her neighborhood, so I guess she just developed a fascination for it. With her parents' permission, I started taking her on trips through the forest, along the trails and such. and you would swear I'd taken her to Disney World. The way she reacted. It was adorable, seeing her cradle the flowers that she would pick and talking to trees like they were alive. Then, one day, we were walking along the Hitchiti Trail, which is a 4-mile woodland trail near the Okmalgi River. Normally it's very beautiful, but on this particular overcast, dreary day, it seemed a bit more foreboding, I guess. Not that that mattered to Penny. She was just happy to be walking through the forest and enjoying the fresh air. We were about 2 miles through. I started to point out that the trees were remarkably green for that time of year, when I noticed Penny wasn't walking next to me anymore. For a split second, I felt scared that I'd lost her. But then I turned around and I saw her standing a few yards back, giggling at something I couldn't see. Sighing in relief, I sprinted over to her. "Penny, what are you looking at?" I looked in the direction she was. Standing there, only about 10 feet away, was a clown. It was a male clown, about 5'10", and a little chubby. He was in a full-body rainbow suit with 3 buttons covered with ribbon, and his shoes were the typical oversized ones. I noticed that he didn't have the prerequisite red hair. His head was bald, but that and his face were both completely covered in white makeup, except for the eyes, which were surrounded by blue. He had ruby red lips, and of course, a large red nose. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't cartwheel. He didn't move at all. He just stood there, completely still, staring at me and Penny. As I said, I'm not usually one to be creeped out by clowns, but seeing a clown out in the middle of the woods for no explicable reason, that'll give anyone the shivers, and I was immediately taken aback. I giggled nervously, and I insisted to Penny that we keep moving. Being the good kid that she was, she said okay, and we started making our way back to where we had come from. At first, she was slightly upset that we weren't going to walk the rest of the trail, but there was no way I was going to go deeper into those woods with that clown there. We got back to the car, and I took her home. Her parents were exceptionally tired when they got back home, so they paid me and all, but they shooed me out of the house. Penny may have been sweet, but her parents were rather snobbish. I said goodbye and left. When I got back home, my mum was already in bed, so I just showered, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed. All the while, I couldn't stop thinking about that clown. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I had trouble sleeping that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, standing there, as still as a corpse, in the middle of those trees. The next time I had to babysit Penny, she asked if we could go back to that same trail. I told her I wasn't sure about that, and I asked if she'd rather go somewhere else this time. But she was insistent on Hitchiti. I was skeptical, but I relented. After all, what were the chances that that clown would be there this time? As we walked along, picking flowers and admiring the trees, we got around to the spot where we had seen that clown the first time. and I was relieved to see that no one was there. She asked if we could walk further this time, and I said okay. We were about another mile down the trail when I thought I heard another set of footsteps just slightly behind us. I was already a little nervous, so I stopped dead and turned around. There was nobody there. Did you hear that, Penny? Hear what? Maybe I just wanted the short respite from my nervousness, but I accepted her not hearing anything and we kept going. After another half a mile, I began to hear the footsteps again. This time, Penny heard them too. Is that what you heard? She asked. I shook my head. Yes. She must have sensed the fear in my voice, because she began to get scared too, and she came closer to me. I hugged her close and whispered, maybe we should head back to the car. She nodded in agreement, and we started walking back in the other direction. After another few yards, we both heard the footsteps again, and we realized that they were speeding up. We both began to sprint through the forest. The footsteps behind us only got faster and faster. I realized that we were running past the same spot where we first saw the clown. I looked back for a split second, only a second, despite my better judgment. The clown was indeed chasing us. Run! Run as fast as you can, I shouted. Penny began to fall behind, and I grabbed her hand to make sure that she could keep up. Just keep running, Penny. We're almost there. Suddenly, Penny began screaming. I felt her hand rip away from mine, and I turned back. That clown had her in his arms, one of his hands over her mouth, stifling her screams. He looked me in the eye, and he began running into the forest. Penny! I screamed. I ran after the clown as he disappeared among the trees. Pretty soon, I realized that I couldn't see him. He had completely disappeared, and so had Penny. Penny! I screamed again, hoping to God that maybe, just maybe, I would hear her scream my name back. But there was nothing. Not a sound. I pulled my phone out, and I saw that it was 7:47 p.m. We had been out a lot longer than I'd hoped. The sun was starting to set. I started to dial 911, but there was no signal. Looking back, I should have known that there wouldn't be a signal out in the thick woods. Abject fear began to set in, but another idea popped into my head. I drew an X in the dirt, where I'd been standing, to mark where Penny had disappeared. And then I ran back to my car and checked my phone again. This time, there was a signal. I started to call 911. On the second ring, the power off notification came up and my phone died. No, please. I started to cry out of both fear and frustration, and I tried to think of something, anything else I could do. Another idea. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I opened the passenger side door of my car and then popped open the glove compartment. I kept a snub-nosed revolver in there, along with a small box of ammo, just in case. I opened up the box as quickly as I could, and I loaded up the gun. I took a deep breath, and then I ran back into the woods, looking along the trail for the X I had drawn. I finally found it, and I looked forward into the dense wood in front of me. Gripping my gun tightly and taking a deep breath, I started walking into the woods, resolving not to come out again until I'd found Penny. I walked for quite some time. The sun was going down, and I hadn't come close to finding Penny at all. "Penny!" I called out. Nothing. Not a sound. I walked on. Before long, night had fallen, and that crippling fear set in again as I realized that I was lost. I had never been in this part of the forest before. We'd always insisted on sticking to the trail. I took another deep breath, and I pressed on. The wood was even scarier at night than it had been on that overcast day. I felt my grip on my gun get tighter, and I realized that my hands were shaking again. That's when I started to hear the footsteps. This time, they weren't sprinting or running. They were slowly coming up behind me, only a few feet away. I turned around and took aim with my gun. Nothing was there. Confused, I turned back around. There stood the clown. I took a step back instinctively. My terror almost had me running again, but I stood my ground. I looked up at the clown's face. His eyes were dark in the night. "Where is she?" I said, and I aimed my gun square at the clown's heart. He said nothing. "Where the hell is she?" I yelled. I could hear my own voice echo throughout the woods. This time, the clown smiled. My eyes opened wide as I saw that his teeth were much longer and much, much sharper than any human's teeth should be. "She's going to die screaming." His voice was a horrible mix between a whisper and a growl. I could have sworn to God I heard several voices in his one whisper, but I was so scared I didn't really take notice at the time. A small whimper escaped my throat, and I felt a tear drop down my face. What were they going to do to her? "Give her back!" This time, I couldn't even sound brave. The fear in my voice was too strong. The clown began to laugh. It was a deep, guffawing laugh that sent all sorts of new shivers down my spine. I felt my fear give way to pure rage, and I squeezed the trigger of my gun. And the shot echoed throughout the forest. The bullet hit the clown square in the chest. Blood started to pour down his chest, and his laughter stopped. Suddenly, he was completely silent again. I took another step back. Any normal person would have fallen from a gunshot like that. The clown hadn't even moved. He just stood there, bleeding and staring at me. I fired again and again and again. I started to feel blood splatter on my shirt. The clown didn't even flinch as the bullets tore more bloody holes through his flesh. Before long, I realized that I had fired all but one shot. This time, I aimed squarely at his head and fired. The bullet tore its way through the clown's eye, and I saw blood splatter all over the grass behind him as the back of his head exploded. He still didn't go down. That horrible smile of his just grew wider. His sharp teeth were gleaming in the moonlight. Then, suddenly, he broke into a hard run towards me. I dropped my gun and I started to run harder than I ever had in my entire life, screaming the entire way. I heard the clown running faster and faster behind me, and a couple of times I felt his fingers almost grip the back of my shirt. I took a hard right and I began running as fast as I could in that direction. I didn't even care where I was going, as long as I was able to outrun that clown. I half expected for him to appear in front of me at some point, but he never did. Pretty soon, all I could hear was my own panting and screaming, and the clown running behind me. Finally, I saw something ahead of me. It was a light. A headlight. I was running towards the highway. I tried running faster. I felt like my lungs were about to explode. For some reason, I felt like getting out of the forest would save me from that clown. Suddenly, that line from The Legend of Sleepy Hollow hit me. Once you cross that bridge, my friend, the ghost is through. His power ends. Finally, I made it to the edge of the forest, and I ran out onto the highway. It was still dark, but I saw up ahead that a truck was making its way towards me. I just stood there, right in the middle of the traffic lane, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The driver thankfully saw me and slowed down. I could tell that he was angry at first, but then he saw how frightened I was. He noticed the blood on my shirt, and he asked if I was okay. I didn't answer. I could barely hear him over the pounding in my ears. The whole world seemed silent. I slowly turned around, half expecting that goddamn clown to come up and grab me. But he wasn't there. There was nothing but trees and darkness. I turned around and I faced the truck driver. Then I felt my knees buckle and everything went black. I woke up in the hospital. My mum was sitting in the chair next to me, and the police were standing outside my room with Penny's parents. Her mother was crying, being comforted by her husband. I happened to catch the husband's gaze and he looked over at me. There was a mix between grief and absolute hatred in his eyes. The officers saw that I was conscious again, and they started asking me questions. Apparently the truck driver had called the cops after I'd passed out, and they had searched the woods. They found my gun lying among the trees. It still had a little blood on it. That, coupled with my bloody shirt, had them thinking that I had done something terrible to Penny. I started crying at the mention of her name, and I insisted that I would never do anything like that. The parents were not convinced until the forensics on the blood came back. It certainly wasn't Penny's. They never could find a DNA match. Penny's parents threatened to have me thrown in prison, but ultimately they didn't follow through. I guess the grief of losing their little girl was already too much. It's been nearly a year since Penny's disappearance and my encounter with that thing out in the woods. I still think about her all the time. Sometimes I even dream about it. I dream that we're still running through that forest, being chased by that clown. But this time, I'm able to hold onto her hand and pull her to safety. And then I wake up, and I realize that this is not some nightmare, and this is real. That poor little girl is gone, and it's my fault. If any smidgen of good can come from this, at least I can share my story. Maybe some of your kids' lives can be saved by knowing what I've gone through. I don't know what happened to Penny. I don't know what happened to that clown. I don't know what that clown was. I don't know how it survived those gunshots. I don't know what he wanted Penny for. I don't know what he wanted me for. All I know is this. Those things are out there. They're dangerous. And they are not human.